Why did the New Zealand Initiative praise Hipkins after he scrapped many of Labour's more progressive policies in 2023? Why did David Seymour praise Jacinda Ardern at an Atlas Network forum?
Jacinda Ardern, in terms of the actual policy prescription that she advocates for and sustains, is a far better adherent of the free market than Donald Trump ever was or will be.
Why is Helen Clark shown as a post-election priority for the Victor for Atlas's CDAC?
To its coalition-building leadership to eliminate wasteful subsidies, CDAC is shaking up the landscape for policy reform. The group's work was particularly influential during last year's presidential campaigns, driving major issues for candidates and setting the stage for post-election priorities for the victor. To learn more about CDAC, please visit cdac.org.
We know the right-wing connections to Atlas, but why would Atlas praise these Labour members? It's because Atlas influences parties on both sides of Parliament. Now hold on a second, I know what you are probably thinking, but I'm not saying both sides are members or work with Atlas. I said they are influenced by Atlas. There's a difference. Being a member or working with Atlas is direct and conscious. Being influenced is often indirect and unconscious. Atlas creates proxies, usually in the form of think tanks and groups like the Taxpayers Union and the New Zealand Initiative. These groups create astroturfs, fake grassroots movements like Groundswell or the Anti-Three Waters movement.
What we were so successful in doing last time is we made an obscure political issue about water reform, Three Waters, into the biggest political issue in the local body elections. And we ended up with a result where we had a majority of councillors elected and a majority of mayors who were staunchly opposed to the Three Waters reforms. And we need to do the same with the Resource Management Act reform.
Then they act directly. For example, the Taxpayers Union spamming submissions against the capital gains tax outnumbering public submissions, which got the capital gains tax scrapped. People blame Winston Peters for it not being implemented, but the evidence shows otherwise. Ardern herself said New Zealand First had not bullied Labour into making the decision, and Atlas themselves admitted it was because of the Taxpayers Union that it got scrapped. Other times, it's indirect. For example, through astroturfs like Groundswell, Atlas pressures the government to drop progressive policies. After the Groundswell protest, Ardern said, "My goal is that we never again have to debate the path that we need to be on as a nation, that we never again see tractors roll up the front steps of Parliament." As she made it so farmers didn't have to pay for their emissions until 2025. Think about it this way, these astroturfs aren't created to influence the right wing. National Act and New Zealand First already align with Atlas. There's little reason to create astroturfs to influence them. Instead, Atlas uses these astroturfs to pressure progressive parties into dropping progressive policies. The astroturfs manipulate public opinion, harass progressive politicians, spam submissions, and use billboards and messaging. The goal is to make the Progressive Party back down and drop as many of their progressive policies as possible. This has happened with every progressive government since the 1980s. Longey's government introduced neoliberalism. Clark passed the Foreshore and Seabed Act. Ardern and Hipkins scrapped climate policies and other progressive policies. This is why Atlas Network proxies ended up praising Chris Hipkins and Jacinda Ardern. Not because they are working for Atlas, but because Atlas knows they can pressure them to drop progressive policies and fall to their demands. So how do we stop Atlas from doing this? First, stop getting defensive when investigative journalists on the left call this out, even if it involves Labour or the left-wing parties. Second, acknowledge that Atlas influences everything, from political parties to even the language we use. Tall poppy syndrome, for example, originally referred to people who would be against revolutionaries who challenged injustice. Not about jealousy of someone rich or successful. The meaning changed under neoliberal propaganda. Third, support or encourage leaders who won't cave to right-wing pressure. Tamatha Paul didn't back down when attacked by politicians and the Sensible Sentencing Trust for her statement on how many marginalised communities don't trust the police. Fourth, apply pressure back. A good example was the public submissions against the Treaty Principles Bill, which far outnumbered those in support. If we don't acknowledge Atlas's influence on both sides of Parliament and respond to it, they will continue to dominate policy outcomes no matter who is in power. And if you still don't believe Atlas Network influences all of government using these astroturfs and think tanks, here is Danielle Smith at a speech at the Atlas Network think tank Frontier Center for Public Policy, mentioning David Seymour and bragging about how much control they have over governments no matter who wins.
We do not elect oppositions. We elect governments, always. As David said, every so often there are these seismic shifts in the political landscape in our province where we stand up and say to the government in charge, you've lost your way.